My opponent argued against me when I stated that new oil is constantly being found each year, and that the oil has increased since 50 years ago. And she stated that if stats are changing, then they are constantly being measured, and if they're not accurate, then they must be pretty close. She also stated that in an article called World Energy Day that was published in 2014, over 2 years ago, they announced that there's new oil found by 1,687 billion gallon increase. So I recently discovered on a website called perk.org article called New Drilling Method, which was published in 2016, this year. They said that a new drilling technique is opening up vast fields of previously out-of-reach oil in the western United States. Oil executives and analysts say the new fields could yield as much as 2 million barrels of oil a day. This is just an example of proving that we are constantly finding more and more oil because of new technology that we're building, and which is exactly why I believe that instead of going to the moon to mine helium-3, which we have no way of transverting into oil or a fuel because we don't have fusion reactors, which is why we need to turn our attention into building machines and technology here on Earth to be able to reach the materials and fuel that we have already here on Earth. The problem with using helium-3 as an energy source is, as published on the spacereview.com by Dwayne Day in the helium-3 incantation, he states that helium-3 is probably spread very thinly over millions of square kilometers of lunar regolith. Collecting it would require a vast strip mining effort with lots of machinery. This proposes the first difficult task in extracting helium-3 from the moon because it's not just found in one spot like everybody claims that it is. It's spread so thinly that it would take decades to be able to make the machinery required to extract the helium-3 from the soil in the first place. Another thing that Day writes about is that electricity generating fusion reactors do not exist. Despite decades of funding, commercial fusion power is still considered by scientists and engineers to be decades away at best. The big first step, getting the same amount of energy out of the reaction that gets put into it to make it occur, has been promised for decades, and even today is apparently a decade or two away. The last argument that I want to go over is when my opponent brought up that there would be either a way to go around the International Space Treaty or that we could have the International Space Treaty revised due to how old it is. So according to state.gov, they displayed a list of all of the countries that have signed the International Space Treaty and agreed on the terms of the treaty. And the treaty comes out to about 125 different countries all agreeing and signing on this treaty. The problem with trying to get it revised would be to get all 125 of these countries to agree to different terms because they all signed this treaty. The second part of the argument where we could go around the space treaty, because they said that people themselves cannot use the moon for their own scientific purposes, but my opponent says that we could go around it by using robots instead of us going there. The problem with this is if the US were to go behind 125 of the other countries' backs and use the moon for its own purposes, but saying that because we didn't physically go there, we had robots go up there and do the work for us. That's not going to go over well with these other countries. And we could see, we would be facing a war against US against the rest of the world. Secondly, if we don't break out into a war because the US were behind everybody's backs, who's to say that China won't start sending up robots for themselves, or India or Russia or any other country, because they have the same rights as we do. So that is why we need to stop wasting our time thinking about even going to the moon and mining it for helium 3.